Good afternoon. It's our honor and privilege to welcome you to the weekly BW Education Wednesday Wisdom. Over the last 18 months, we brought to you education leaders who are thought leaders, who are doers, and who are shaping the destiny of institutions and the students, and by that corollary, the destiny of the nation. Today, in the BW Education Wednesday Wisdom, we have the director of an institution that I would say is among the finest business schools in India, and especially the privately owned business schools. Let me welcome Dr. Vishal Talwar, who is the director of IMT Ghaziabad, to the BW Education Wednesday Wisdom. With me is my editorial colleague, Vasudha Mishra. Me and Vasudha will take this conversation forward, but let me first welcome Dr. Vishal Talwar. Dr. Talwar, glad we are having a conversation. I must tell you that I applied to IMT Ghaziabad but didn't make it. But that's another story, another day. Let me start by asking you, how have been your last 18 months, both personally and professionally?
Well, thank you, Dr. Batra. Thank you for having me here today. Absolute pleasure. Of course, it's been an amazing roller coaster ride. The last 18 months, I guess initially in March, no one knew what hit us all. And we all hope that we'll be back soon to the campuses, planning for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, when we'll come back with all the students there. But little did we know then this would be a 1.5 year sojourn. And it has required a lot of recalibration, to be honest, personally as well as professionally. Of course, as a nuclear family, we've had time to spend with each other, but then longer stays apart with the extended family, because my family is all across the country and abroad. So travel obviously has become difficult. Professionally, it's been fruitful, it's been challenging, it's required a lot of digging deep, and then looking at how we could possibly change. Being an educationist, it's required a lot of work, creativity, sweat coming together, practice, preparation, unlearning, relearning, so as to be able to ensure that the learning happens in the right way.
I like the word recalibration. It's resetting, but the future of work is different from what it is now and what it was 16 months back. The future of businesses is different. Hence, the business school education has to recalibrate itself. What do you think are the opportunities in front of business school directors and leaders like you? Because if business has changed, so has to business school curriculum, the teachers, and we talk of this hybrid learning on campus, off campus. And as I said, I'm on the board of MDI. The students in the second batch, in the first batch, want to be on the campus. They don't want education through the screen. They want on-campus experiences. So tell us, what is the opportunity for these schools to reset themselves, to recalibrate themselves?
Look, the change has been happening for some time. Whether we call it change, that's been happening. It's just got speeded up because of the crisis that we've seen in the last 1.5 years. To give you a context, business education, and in fact any kind of education which is professionally orientated, has seen a lot of competitive orientation, an increase in competition, whether that be competitive rise in the graduate jobs market, whether that be the rising cost of higher education. We in India, largely we are agile university setups, which predominantly are able to offer something back, which is largely around placement or a good exit. But it has required a lot of recalibration. It has required a lot of us to actually look back and think, what is it that we offer in the form of learning, in the form of curriculum, go back to the drawing board, understand what it takes to be able to be competitive, understand what it takes to be able to ensure that there's a certain level of classroom experience. And of course, in this case, the classroom by itself has changed a great deal. And what you were talking about earlier, the blended or the hybrid, learning orientation, quite frankly, most educational institutions have had to learn to adapt to this kind of model. That has required, in fact, once again, questioning the relevance of the curriculum. What is the approach that we have to learning? Our faculty essentially extending what they did in the offline mode into the online mode, which quite frankly doesn't necessarily work. So a lot of these things, we've all had to look at. That's the reason why I use the word recalibration. At the same time, there are many tailwinds, there are many headwinds, just like in the business world. If you look at business, what was an advantage has become a disadvantage, and vice versa. Models have had to change. The other day I was speaking to someone from the FMCG sector, and they said we strategize for every month rather than have these long-term plans. So that has also rubbed off on the education sector as a whole, management education definitely. And you're right, a lot of the students, yes, for the last 1.5 years have been learning in the online mode at home. There is certain levels of fatigue. There is certain levels of yearning to want to come back. Whether they come back to the exact same thing is the big question, right? Or they would like to come back because automatically it's about peer learning. It's about experiencing the learning. It's about a lot of the activities which are outside the classroom as well, which matter when you're talking about business education, when you're talking about management education. But that has required a lot of recalibration. I think, when you talk about blended learning, when you talk about this whole concept of hybrid learning, it's here to stay. But in what format is the bigger question. That's something that we have to look at. We've always been talking about flipped approaches to learning. We've always been talking about ensuring that there's a 24/7 continuity of the learning. I think now is the opportunity to be able to ensure that learning happens in a more continuous manner, rather than in a manner which there's a lot of disjointed focus. So that has required going back, creating, let's say, for example, centers of teaching and learning, which are focusing on ensuring that the faculty are being able to do the right job in the classroom, ensuring that the assurance of learning takes place. What's actually happening? Is it a transliteration of what you wanted to do in any case when you were in the offline mode? You deconstruct your curriculum, right? You try and look at what matters, what doesn't. Is it about completion of 100% of the curriculum, or is it about ensuring that even if it's 80%, have you done it properly in the experiential manner? A lot of those questions have had to be answered, and that's why I use the word recalibration here.
I love the word because I said, Dr. Talwar, that we live in a world which is a 3C economy: a collaborative economy, a contactless economy, and a compassionate economy. So to reimagine whether I run a media company, whether Vasudha as a journalist, you as an educationist / leader, a management leader of an institution, we all have to reimagine what we do in the context of a post-corona. We're not fully post-corona, but hopefully we will be. Now, let me ask you the biggest question. See, a business school is about learning and it is about placement. I'm simplifying it, right? Learning and placement, both are important. Not one is important. And as I rightly said, IMT is on the top 10 business schools, top 15 business schools, depending on, it's among the top business schools in the country, you don't have to tell. Now, when you become the director, what are your plans to take IMT Ghaziabad and to the next level? Of course, there's an IMT Nagpur, and so on and so forth. And as I said right up front, you have the AACSB accreditation right up there on the screen. I understand that. I think people who are on the bweducation.com watching your thing, or businessworld.in, understand that most of them. Me being an MDI student, being an alumni, now being on the board of governors of MDI, I certainly understand what AACSB is. It's an accreditation which is very, very prestigious. It happens after years of compliance, scrutiny, and maintaining a certain level of standards, and really puts the school in a different league, so to say. There are not many schools in India that are both AMBA or AACSB accredited. So what are your plans for IMT Ghaziabad?
So as far as IMT Ghaziabad is concerned, absolutely. Thank you very much, for mentioning us, and at the same time IMT Ghaziabad, and the fact that we have an AACSB accreditation, and that's been there for quite some time. I think that kind of tells us, or is an indicator to the assurance of learning, the fact that there are certain standards that we adopt, and there are certain global standards that we adopt in the entire value chain process, in a way, as far as learning is concerned. So IMT Ghaziabad has been there for the last 40 years, a great institution, as you mentioned, with a strong learning focus, with a strong legacy. It, of course, has transformed the lives and careers of more than 15,000 students and other participants. In fact, many more than that. Some of the best faculty in India and abroad are shaping thought, strategies, policies. Remember, when you're trying to, maintain a certain standard or sustain it, or in fact keep pushing it up, it's not a function of, knowledge dissemination in the classroom, but it's also a function of how you are able to create knowledge, be one step ahead, be able to shape, management thought per se. So, of course,
research and development.
Absolutely, and I think for us, it is of course about sustaining that, and at the same time also realizing that to be able to sustain it, a lot of different things need to be factored in. What I was mentioning earlier, the kind of learning that you offer, the kind of programs that you offer, the basket of programs that you offer, the new age nature of management education, which kind of brings in major elements of technology learning as well as liberal arts orientation. A lot of this will be required for managers of the future. And automatically, these are things that we are keeping ourselves busy with. What would curriculum look like in the future? Yes, a successful placement is one major driver, as I was mentioning, as agile setups. But to be able to create that kind of atmosphere and that kind of environment, I think there's a lot of other things that go behind it. As a true blue academic, I would say, of course, the learning is paramount, and of course, the placement, of course, is a natural extension of the whole thing. So I think both have to go hand in hand. It is a bidirectional causality of sorts. So we're working on that. We're looking at existing, product offering, the value proposition. We are looking at, what research is out there. We are looking at, various centers of excellence that we need to be able to ensure that those centers of excellence become, grounds for a lot of thought shaping as well as policy contribution and making. These are things that we are rather busy with. And at the same time, what we are also looking at is to understand where is education going? How do we align it with, where work is going, quite frankly? What are the skill sets that are possibly required for managers of the future? Work obviously is going in very different directions, contributed by technological change, contributed by COVID. A lot of major decisions are being made sitting in not in the boardrooms, but possibly in living rooms across the world. And that itself completely changes leadership styles. You're leading people that you might possibly never meet, which by itself requires you a very different orientation. It itself requires you to inculcate a certain skill sets. How do you manage virtual teams? How do you manage physical teams? How do you ensure you're getting work done? How do you ensure that you're leading people who may not necessarily meet you on a very regular basis, if at all? That requires a lot of change. How do I ensure that this whole idea of automation, a lot of automation is happening in various different sectors. It's in some cases 40%, in some cases 50%. A lot of sales activation is now very much automated, for example. How do business leaders manage in this particular kind of environment when you're not necessarily competing, working with other people, but you're also, factoring in machines and their ability to not require you anymore. What's the big difference in Industry 4.0? The biggest difference from the other industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 is that machines don't necessarily require you anymore to be able to do their jobs. So what do you do? What's your relevance? How do you ensure that you're able to build up skill sets which go much beyond possibly matching a balance sheet, possibly creating a profit loss statement? How do you go a few steps further up? So we're quite busy, trying to understand and look at what work will look like, and in the process, what curriculums need to look like going forward.
My last question, but I also want to say that COVID was a mixed bag, both in terms of lives and livelihood. And one of my very close friends, who's an IMT pass out, he was the chairman of the alumni, like I'm the chairman of MDI's alumni. And when I became the alumni chairman, I called him to seek his views. Passed away during COVID. I know you know that I'm referring to Mr. Rajiv Karwal, and I'm sure he's looking down on us and smiling. My friend Prasoon Joshi from IMT Ghaziabad, my friend Shubhinder Singh Prem, is from, and I can go on. I have at least 50 close friends from India, and another 25 close friends from IMT Ghaziabad, who are really part of a very close inner circle. So IMT lost Rajiv Karwal. But my last question to you, before I bring in Vasudha for the conversation. Now, it is where you talked about the change business environment, the digital enablement of every business, and the digital leadership. If your business is not digital, you're not digital. I want to ask you a question which is a little philosophical. What do you think what do you have to say about the evaluation of edutech firms? And do you think edutech will replace education, or do you think it's a supplemental form of learning? What are your views on the edutech ecosystem, the edutech players, their valuations, their impact? And philosophically, while they were deployed to digitally democratize access to education, in some cases, they've ended up creating even a wider digital divide. They've bridged it also. But what's your view on edutech?
So I think, obviously, EdTech, especially in the last few years, has become rather prominent. And of course, they have been able to capture wider spectrum, more imagination, of course, have provided a lot of people access to, learning in some forms. Now, I think the access to learning, or the ability to learn, gain access to certain content, knowledge repositories, and of course, at the same time, getting faculty to be able to teach you in the online mode is obviously a welcome step in a way. And of course, people have been at home, people have been able to experiment, people have been able to benefit from the EdTech companies. I think the question is more around whether, and this is something I'm sure will get answered in the slightly longer term, is this whole idea of, yes, you can increase access, you can enable a good number of people to possibly provide a certain signal to society that they've finished particular certificates or courses. I think it's about whether this will then help capitalize on the demographic dividend or the access dividend, right? Which means that, yes, people are being able to get, sitting at home, certain form of learning. How that learning happens, how much of that learning you're able to retain, and more importantly, how much of that learning you're able to capitalize on in the longer term, that will then, provide my perceived value in the long term of what, this education has been able to provide. Having said that, you would obviously notice that EdTech companies have come in. You are seeing a lot of interesting collaborations, between what I would call as traditional higher education institutions as well as EdTech companies, right? So obviously they're on their own, higher education institutions are also on their own, but at the same time, for various reasons, there's a lot of collaboration that you will see going forward. I think that by itself will possibly involve a lot of transition and transfer of knowledge on both sides. To answer that earlier question that I had, earlier answer that I gave you very briefly is about, how is learning being capitalized on, and how learning is actually happening, how we are able to ensure that it is much beyond essentially a certain amount of content. It is about, being able to retain it, being able to use it, being able to capitalize it, and then being able to, make sure that helps you in change. That I think will take some time, and that will require a lot of transition between what I would call as traditional setups as well as, EdTech startups. Of course, valuations is once again a different ballgame altogether, and I think valuations in this particular space, especially in when you invest in startups, is obviously more around potential. Than anything else. So, you're looking at a futuristic orientation, you're looking at the potential of how a particular firm, irrespective of whether it's EdTech or otherwise, will perform in the long term. I think that provides, this whole, concept of what the value might be at this stage. So, yeah, but we live in interesting times, Dr. Batra.
Oh, thank you so much for answering that. And it is my turn to come in and ask some questions. There's definitely a lot we need to like the Uding talk spoke about, and we're going to definitely get into that. But before we do, I would like to go back a little bit, and I would like to ask you, this is a new position for you. You've been in IMT for about a month right now, and before this, you were in BML. And other than that, you've sort of had your foot in a lot of different waters. You've been in industry, you've been academics, you supported startups, and now you're director. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey, or like what led you to this position that you are in today?
So, well, yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting journey. As you mentioned, obviously, I started off, in the marketing world, working, I have, had a stint in the advertising world, I had a stint in, on the client side and in the automotive sector. And thereafter, I decided to do my doctorate, my PhD. That led me to foreign shores. It led me to the United Kingdom. I did my PhD over there. And of course, once you are within, an academic kind of environment, and that kind of bug actually, catches you or bites you. So automatically, I realized that my calling was within, the academic, firmament, within the academic world. Made natural progressions within the academic space, moved on from a particular location, moved to the London School of Economics, was there for a few years, by which time then moved on to Henley Business School, once again as a marketing academic. Thereafter, and somewhere around then, I did decide to come back, to India because I wanted to be part of the institution building world here. I realized that I could possibly be of some value in being able to work within academic institutions, let's say beyond research, beyond teaching. Of course, that is something which is still at the core. But I felt that India was for me a more attractive place when I talk about institution building. When I talk about the fact that I want to get into more administrative positions and roles. And that's what happened. When I came back to India, all of my roles have been administrative. And in India, academic administrative roles are like the entire value chain. You've got to look at every aspect of the whole thing. And I think that I've benefited a great deal from that. As far as the startup space is concerned, I always have this bit of an inkling. Be part of the startup world. That kind of interest started when I was in the UK, especially in London. I spoke to, I engaged with, I had conversations with people who were very young startups, and that bug kind of bit me there. Since then, I've been on and off engaged with different startups in different capacities. At times as advisor, at times as other roles, and that kind of helps me keep connected with the practical world. It helps me keep connected with the latest, the spirit, the creativity, the challenge. That startups face, especially the early cycle, in the early stages. So that's been of interest to me, and that still carries on. I think that's something that, of course, I don't get much time for it now to put in that much effort. But whenever I get the opportunity, if I have some time, I can still indulge with startups. But my predominant role as a director is very exciting. At IMT Ghaziabad, before this, I've been dean. I've been Director of Innovation Entrepreneurship in my previous role. So all this essentially is, I view all these as a challenge. I view all these as the ability to work on things, work with people, help people reach their own aspiration, their own dreams. I'm the kind who would go there and work with everyone and say, hey, tell me, how can I possibly help you reach where you would like to reach? And I think that's my predominant orientation. And it's been a great journey so far. No complaints.
So that's wonderful to hear. And, I think it's very exciting to have someone who has this much experience in industry, in every facet of industry, and also globally, and then come back and be able to share that kind of knowledge with the youth today. So that being said, what are some things that we can expect from IMT under your leadership?
So I think, we've got a bright future ahead. You'll see, IMT, Ghaziabad in various forms, leading on many fronts. You'll see a lot of pioneering research, coming out from the amazing faculty that we have here. Our faculty come from all over the place in India as well as abroad. You'll see a lot of good work. You'll see a lot of thought. You'll see a lot of policies. You'll see a lot of our catchments of excellence being able to produce work which is out there with the best, within the academic world. At the same time, we have an amazing set of students. Our students are people who really want to achieve, or would really want to reach a certain kind of goal. And I think it is important for us to ensure that the right kind of learning environment is created, right? And of course, remember, the learning environment is always dynamic. Learning environment cannot necessarily be static at all. So, I think you'll see a lot of activities. You'll see a lot of intellectual thought, intellectual output, not only from the faculty, from our students. You'll see our students, out there shining, doing rather well in organizations. And in fact, one aspect that we would now want to focus on in greater detail will be the innovation and entrepreneurship piece. That's not necessarily just because I'm interested in it, and it's not just because I had previous experience in it, but that's because, fundamentally speaking, if you look forward to a different world, this whole idea of the gig economies, and this whole focus on self-employment, or this whole focus on people having multiple roles at the same time, and at the same time, it is imperative that institutions like us, pioneering institutions like us, are able to contribute to that ecosystem, right? If you have bright minds, the idea is you're not just creating bright minds to be able to, or shaping bright minds to be able to become job consumers, right? But you're shaping bright minds to one day become job producers as well, right? So that's another focus that we are looking at with great fervor. And we'll create the right kind of atmosphere, the right kind of modules, the right kind of learning, the right kind of mentoring, so that also gets kick-started as well. So there'll be a lot of exciting things that we have in store to build on what we've already done as far as being an educational institution is concerned.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the demands of even students have changed now, and they want so much more from their careers, and definitely that's not a burden on an institute. That's actually an opportunity for you all too, right? Because you'll be able to create these wonderful unicorns in the industry. That would be great, and everyone benefits from this. We absolutely need industry academias to work together. And I know you already talked about Edtech, but how is IMT sort of like working with Edtech or with companies or industries to sort of bring in that industry academia collaborations that we're seeing so much of today?
So I think for us, the industry academic relationship has been at the core, and I think simply because at the end of the day, if you're trying to get or build up business leaders or shape business thought, you can't do it in isolation. As an educational institution, as a management institution of repute, your strategies, your conversations, what you teach in the classroom cannot just be limited to looking at the industry as a way to fulfill your placement cycle, right? It cannot be, and I think it's not sustainable, especially in the current climate and environment. I think everyone's become demanding, and of course that also means that educational institutions have to be able to engage more with the industry, with industry in various formats. It's not just about an internship. It's not just about a way to secure a final placement. It's also about engaging, with academia in various forms. I think it has to become a more co-created, more collaborative relationship, wherein there's a good belief between the both parties. I think it's important to do that. So for us, it's been a regular feature in any case. So whether it is about industry coming into the classroom to be able to provide a lot of their success stories, to be able to provide a lot of the cases, to be able to essentially inspire the students in the class. It's about the kind of data sets that we work with. These are actual data sets that people might be able to provide us that we work on. So these are actual problems to be able to ensure that people become better problem solvers. At the same time, it is also important that the curriculum gets co-created as well. The industry is as much a partner in trying to figure out, hey, what is the educational institution or the management institution working on? What are they teaching in the classroom? Is it relevant? And it is important that we have constant dialogue with them about what is it that we offer in the classroom. Some institutions like us, we've been doing it for some time. For us, it's about going further. For us, it's about, how do we create a certain experiential learning that brings in industry in more regular ways into the classroom. And we constantly dialogue with the industry for that to happen. I think that's what builds up many things, and that can be kind of looked at as essentially one particular sentence, employability, right? It's important, if you're trying to look at a certain kind of skill sets, whether it's problem solving, whether it's problem identification, whether it's creativity, whether it's communication, whether it's ambidexterity, whether it is mental strength, technological comfort. Once again, it has to be done in coordination and closely with the industry as well.
Absolutely, because industry also needs to know exactly what students are coming ready with and what are their own skills that they can also sort of leverage. It's not just what the industry has to teach them, it's also what skills they already have and what they can use, where they can use it, how they can use it. It's because students are a great resource, and employability is not just about having a job, it's also about creating a career, building a fraternity in a company or in a university for that matter. So this whole year has been absolutely crazy. And we've been doing a lot of distance learning. You mentioned that you still have online classes ongoing, which of course is going to be the case. Do you see eventually turning the system into a hybrid blended learning model, or maybe eventually moving back to completely offline? What are your plans with the learning system that's in place right now?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, this whole concept of blended learning or hybrid learning is obviously here to stay. But I think it also depends on what is going to lead and what's going to lag. I think that's more, a bigger question. Every day, whichever institution that you belong to, whether it's a standalone institution, whether it is a university, every day, people at decision-making levels are being asked questions. Hey, when are we going to open up the campus? When are we going to start classes? At least offline, online, a combination. What does that mean? That means that there is a certain level of fatigue attached to being at home in the same place. And that obviously makes you yearn to come back to the campus. Now, obviously, that means that the importance of an offline existence, the importance of being together, the importance of a lot of group-oriented work, the touch and feel, for example, being able to learn from each other, being able to inspire each other while you're, together working, possibly till late nights. What's happening now at this stage is that something that was very natural in the campus, for example, sitting in the library and working till about 3 a.m. and getting your assignments done in a group or otherwise, was in a way very exciting, in a way, right? I don't know what the students might think about it, but quite frankly, it wasn't viewed as a burden. But the same thing, if the students are actually sitting in their homes, is possibly contributing to a certain level of, fatigue, right? So obviously, every institution anywhere in the world acknowledges that. But of course, we got to be rather mindful of, when you're able to open up completely. Regulatory bodies are out there, government regulations exist. So automatically, we all have to be mindful of that. So I think even after you come back to campus, even after you start, in certain grades, offline classes, the online orientation or the fact that the online learning becomes an extension of the continuous learning process, that will definitely reinforce offline learning by itself. I think, like I said, technology-assisted learning, will enable better, what I would call as flipped approaches to learning. It'll help you engage more with the material. It'll help, teachers in the classroom not only converse and talk in the classroom, but also possibly create bites and podcasts and post it somewhere so that the continuity of engagement carries on. So I think from that perspective, there'll be a lot of reinforcement. There'll be complementary, and that by itself will help everyone. I think it will help higher educational institutions, become more engaged with the learning and with their students.
Yes, and you did sort of mention how, all of these things were sort of already in place or about to come up, and the pandemic kind of just accelerated all the things. But that being said, other than acceleration, is there anything that changing the distance learning has really changed in your perception of education itself or how it needs to be taught?
So I think it depends largely on what kind of distance learning we're talking about here. I think distance learning has various connotations. One of the connotations, obviously, is that distance learning is distanced, and which also means that the levels of supervision, for example, or the levels of engagement, for example, possibly may also be limited. Is that the right kind of learning? That's something that we have to look at. The other form of learning, and this is something that a lot of good institutions, including EdTech institutions, are doing are trying to create more engagement, are trying to ensure more transformative learning, are trying to look at ways and means by which you can personalize your education, right? And I think that kind of distance learning will definitely benefit. And I think if you notice that kind of learning, the time has come that a lot of educational institutions, with offline infrastructure, with anywhere in the world, also have started adopting. Right? It's essentially about how do you ensure transformation, right? And transformation can only be achieved if there's a consistent engagement, there's a constant dialogue, there's a constant mentoring, there's a constant guidance. And I think when I mix up offline and online learning in the right manner with science behind it, as well as certain levels of creativity, I think that's when this form of learning will actually become very, very beneficial for everyone, right? So I think that's what, I think.
Oh, yeah, I think you made some really good points there, because we need to understand what we mean by distance learning, because there are a lot of people who have been doing distance learning even before the pandemic started. There are obviously open universities that also offer courses. It's not something that is very new or unique. And again, it's the same thing as any other skill-based course. Like, it was something that was already there. It just got accelerated. It got more widely adapted, more widely accepted.
I just wanted to add a point there. I mean, it's good that you highlighted that, because look, at the end of the day, if you look back, at least the generation that I belong to, and even further generations, if you look back to how most of us may have learned, there was obviously a lot of dependence on what the teacher in the classroom is professing, what the teacher in the classroom is talking about, what syllabus is the professor covering. And of course, in the process, your preparation, let's say for the exam, was designed in that kind of manner, right? So automatically, that means that there was a certain amount of dependence on what the teacher was talking about in the class. I'm not saying it's higher education. What I'm saying is that even if you go back to your class 1, class 2, class 3, whatever, even then something like that happened. And all of a sudden, with a higher proportion of people having been taught in that kind of environment where there was a lot of dependence on the sage on the stage, are put into an environment wherein there's a lot of reliance on your own abilities to ensure that you're prepared, to ensure that you're going through all the material, you're going through all the content, you're going through everything so that you're better prepared for possibly the class, possibly for an exam. I think yes, it is common in some quarters, possibly, let's say, for example, if you're studying for CA or whatever, but by and large, it's not that common. I mean, if people who are kind of being educated in a certain kind of manner are then told that, hey, there's now a huge amount of reliance on you yourself to be able to come up to scratch, right, with the kind of learning material we've given you. I think that's where the problem is, right? It'll take some time for us to move on from that model into another model wherein we ourselves are intrinsically motivated to pick up that content and learn by ourselves, and the classrooms are used as mechanisms to discuss, or which is more of a constructivist approach to learning.
Absolutely,
Okay.
it's a complete shift in the way you think. I mean, personally, knowing myself and the kind of student I was in school, this system would not have worked for me at all. The best way, for me to learn was actually go and sit in the front of the class and have the teacher talk directly to me and then ask me questions that I could not answer. That would force me to actually learn the material and know the material. And yeah, there is a lot of reliance on yourself. And while that may work for certain sectors and certain types of, like you mentioned, CA, now that's complete change. I mean, I think even with the NEET exams that were on Sunday, at least, they mentioned how an analysis of it spoke about how a majority of, I think, the biology paper came directly from the NCRT books. And as someone who doesn't know much about NEET, I was like, well, should it always be that way? Shouldn't it be coming from the books? But no, it's like you mentioned, there is a reliance on the teacher, on the people who is teaching you. And when you have more teaching involved and more people involved, the way your examination is conducted is also going to change. And there aren't a lot of teaching inputs, then you're going to go back to the base material and the books and rely more on the written word, which is natural. But it's interesting because you kind of need a balance of both, right? Especially with management. I mean, you need to also bring in, like you said, you need to bring in the industry, you need to bring up the all the different options that's going on in the world. You need to be able to bring in the skills, and skills have also, demand for skills have changed quite a bit. We'll be talking about soft skills and digitization and tech skills, but every industry is going to see and reevaluate and look at what skills are absolutely needed. Actually, that's a great segue into my next question, because I wanted to ask you about skills. And being in the position that you are, how are you and your team talking about skilling students right now? What are the most important skills that you need to sort of introduce into your curriculum to make sure that your students learn?
So I think for us, because we obviously have the ACSB accreditation, and of course at the same time, a strong mechanism to ensure that students are learning well, are possibly shining out there. I think, but it's still a dynamic process. So I think for us, it's a constant process of looking at what we're doing. At times, going back to the drawing board, looking at the curriculum, its relevance, trying to understand is it challenging enough for both parties. So I think what you have to remember here is that the relevance of what we teach, the challenge of what we teach. Remember, we're teaching a generation which, and I would assume most of us, our students would be essentially generation Z or Z, born post 1994, 1995. So, a large proportion of them, right? So automatically, the curriculum has to be challenging, has to be, taught in the way it should be. It's fundamentally, you've got to remember that it's not as if the student doesn't want to learn. He possibly may not like how he's being taught, right? And that's something that is also important for us to consider. And that's where this whole piece of discussion around Edtech, remote learning, technology assisted learning, a lot of these things do come in into the picture. So I think have we built the flexibility into it also becomes rather important, right? So I think learning essentially is not about what's there in the textbook. Learning is about inspiring. Learning is about ensuring that you're creating an environment where the student wants to know more by himself or herself. Okay, so a lot of those things will become fundamentally important. How are we building strong levels of qualitative and quantitative appreciation becomes fundamentally important, because I think both for most courses do become important. I think when you're teaching business education, or management education, qualitative and a quantitative orientation both become important because both contribute to, building better business leaders. At the same time, like I was mentioning earlier, how are we building the industry connect? When exactly do they come into the classroom? What is it that we do with them becomes important. How is that kind of interaction contributing to the continuity of learning becomes more important. It's not about getting a guest lecture and essentially showcasing him or her within the institution. It's about whether they add further to the dialogue becomes fundamentally important, which means that how do I then integrate that into the curriculum becomes important. How do you ensure and the next biggest challenge for us all will be about how do I ensure I'm able to create an interdisciplinary learning culture, right? Those are very important. Students are young, they would obviously want to stick to a particular curriculum, right, which has been designed. But at the same time, you got to remember that in the long term, we really don't know what jobs exist or what careers exist. People will keep changing careers, will keep changing jobs, right? So automatically that means that it's not just about a curriculum. It is also about whether I can build in certain levels of appreciation for multidisciplinary learning into the picture. Something that I was talking about earlier with Dr. Batra was this whole idea of tech appreciation, technology understanding, your ability, your comfort with coding, for example, your comfort, with obviously your core domain knowledge is fundamentally important. But at the same time, this whole idea of the liberal orientation will also become important. Certain subjects which are not necessarily common within the classroom, sustainability, for example, economic history, for example. A lot of these things become fundamentally important if you're wanting to become a business leader in a world which will constantly keep changing, right? Managers or management institutions are not necessarily shaping you for your first job, even though at times it looks like that, right? But they're shaping you for possibly another 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years. Okay, and of course, very interestingly, the 10, 15, 20 years, how it'll look, no futurist will be able to tell you, right? That automatically means that you're preparing most people for a world that none of us are able to philosophize about. None of us are able to kind of look into a crystal ball and talk about, right? So that automatically means that the focus on building you as a person becomes primarily, or in fact becomes as important as your ability to learn certain subjects, management, tech, or liberal, right? How do you build yourself as a person? Your mental strength, how you're able to live a life and not just make a living, right? Those things become important. I think your ability to understand yourself, your ability to understand other people also becomes fundamentally important. A lot of these aspects, will become center stage. And of course, what you have to remember here is that some will be in the curriculum, and some will be mechanisms by which you're doing workshops, you're doing not just focusing on the 9 to 5 or the 9 to 6, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. what's happening in the classroom, but what's happening in between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning, right? I think that needs to be curated much more as well, right? And I think this is where the biggest challenge is. How do you curate? You're spending 40% of your time in the classroom, but you're spending 60% of your time outside. Can management institutions use that time to build a better you or build a better business leader? I think that's the biggest challenge.
Absolutely, like bringing in that whole holistic education that's been talked about quite a bit right now, especially with the new national education policy of 2020. Actually, going that on a little bit, just because it's such a big current event right now. Do you have any opinions on it? Like, how are you bringing that into your own curriculum? Has it changed any of your perception on education?
Yes, absolutely. I think as a policy, I think this is definitely forward-looking policy. It has two aspects in mind. It has obviously one major aspect that it has in mind is how do we ensure that we're teaching what is relevant? How do we ensure a certain liberal orientation? How do we ensure that giving choice, to the participant, to the student on what he or she would like to learn. And of course, at the same time, you got to remember that, as a nation, we also have to be objective in how we increase the gross enrollment ratio, right? So if you want to reach 50% of the people, who are eligible for, let's say, graduation, or, let's say, getting into college, or, into university, go to university, it does require a lot of futuristic thinking. It requires a lot of ambitious thinking, and I think this new education policy has that element in there. How do I ensure that many more of our people are actually being able to optimize on their potential? So from that perspective, of course, the new education policy is there. It'll help a great deal. It'll increase the choice. It'll also shape up. It'll reduce the variance in quality across the nation. So I think I'm rather optimistic. Now it's more a question of how it'll be implemented, right? It's a question. I'm sure every institution at this particular stage is thinking about it. Is thinking about, hey, how do we make use of the new education policy? Which elements can we already start incorporating? So a lot of people are thinking about interdisciplinarity, right? A lot of people are thinking about bringing in technology possibly, or deconstructing the curriculum. A lot of people actually thinking about that. How do I increase possibly my cluster? How do I make interesting collaborations with other institutions, with the industry, to fulfill a particular weak area that I might have, right? You'll see very interesting collaborations going forward, and that's also driven by the fact that the government and the authorities would like more and more people to benefit from learning and from education. So I'm rather optimistic. I think there's some way to go. Depends, especially when we are implementing this. But I think as a policy, it's rather forward-looking.
I mean, it's all in the implementation. It's a policy. It really depends on how every institute decides to sort of take it in. And there's a lot of people who have just said that, well, we've already been doing this. This is just legitimizing what we've already kind of efforts we've already kind of put into place already, which is great because that's the way it should be. It should really be working together. And I know we talked a lot about all the different changes that we're seeing, all the things that needs to be done, and you said that we can't predict the future. But even then, I'm still going to ask you this question: is there a playbook to running a B-School?
Well, I think every playbook, I would imagine, has been thrown out of the window by many people.
That's right.
I wish I could mention that, of course, there's a playbook. Of course, there is a template to success. Possibly, there may have been a playbook, but I think, it's not going to be like an aircraft pilot's manual, to be honest. Right? The aircraft, the pilot, what does he do? Or he or she looks at the manual and goes through the entire process. Hey, step A, step 2, step C, whatever. Right? Quite frankly, in education, being a service, an intangible service, and looking at the kind of tailwinds, the kind of headwinds, looking at the changes, looking at changes in expectations, the internationalization, looking at a lot of different factors that impinge on becoming a good, management leader or a business leader. I think a lot of this, you can't depend on one playbook. Possibly there's a playbook, but there's a playbook with a lot of dynamism attached, constant change, constant move as far as the puzzle is concerned. But there are a few fundamental things that will always remain constant in that playbook. And at the core will be learning. At the core will be this whole idea of being able to ensure that student learning is happening, right? Learning in what form, learning in, how much in which particular form, how much to learn, what to learn, when to learn. A lot of those things, once again, are, completely up for change. The other fundamental thing, will be in that playbook is that, your ability to have the right software. When I use the word software, what I mean is the intellectual capacities in an institution. Right? the right intellectual capacity in the institution will then determine whether the learning gets exercised, whether the learning happens in the right kind of manner, right? So I think these two will remain a constant. The right faculty, providing the right levels of experience, will become, it will remain constant, but there is no fixed playbook per se. Okay, that will keep on changing because there's so much to be done now.
All right. Well, actually, that's really great. I mean, that makes complete sense. And thank you for just stating some of the fundamentals. I know it's not an easy question anymore, and given the entire conversation we had, but I think that's a big curiosity a lot of us have when we speak with someone in your position and with your unique perception into education and academia. So just to wind things up, I would like to ask my final question, which is what are your future plans for yourself and IMT Ghaziabad?
So my plans and IMT's plans, I would imagine, are intertwined. Right?
Good answer.
I'm looking forward to working with everyone at IMT. Working on the various elements, looking at how learning is happening, looking at how learning will happen, looking at how do we sustain ourselves, how do we position ourselves as pioneers of management learning. How do we ensure that, how do we add various other elements to that particular learning? Are there other things out there that we could possibly do? Are there, other aspects in terms of, courses, in terms of engagements or experiential aspects that we could possibly include? So, I think the basic idea here is that, me and IMT obviously are looking forward to working with every student to be able to achieve what we would like to achieve. We've done, a bit in the last 40 years. Strong legacy, as I was mentioning earlier, the trust and the confidence, the fantastic faculty, the fantastic students, the fantastic approach to learning, mutual respect. And these are things, along with this, we need to factor in, how learning looks like in the future. So I think that's my main mandate here. And I look forward to working with everyone for that to happen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talwar. And I think everyone at IMT is probably also looking forward to working with you. I mean, based on what we have heard today, it seems very exciting to see what IMT and Ghaziabad is going to do next. And actually, I did get an alert today that your admission process for postgraduate diploma in management applications has started today onwards. So those who are interested in applying for June 2022, you can visit the IMT website and you can apply for a postgraduate program from today. And thank you so much, Dr. Talwar, for coming here. And if anyone wants to rewatch this, then you can always revisit our YouTube channels, our BW Education channel, LinkedIn, Facebook. It's available right there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Talwar.
Thanks very much, Vasudha, and thank you, rest of the team. Thank you, Dr.
This was very insightful and very interesting. It was it was an honor to speak to you about all these different facets of education and get an insight into what management education is going to be looking like in the coming year. And if those of you interested, we do Wednesday Wisdom every Wednesday, 4:30 to 5:30. Next week, we have Dr. Vidya Yeravedkar, Pro-Chancellor of Symbiosis International University. Join us at the same time, same place. So we hope to see you again next week. Thank you, Dr. Talwar.